when I retired or attempted to retire, I realized I actually did really kind of miss running agencies. I didn't want to just do the same thing I'd already done. So instead of like starting one and, running it over 10 years like I did before, the goal is to start 5 and rapidly grow them over, 3, 4, 5 years.
Welcome to Get Unstuck and On Target, the weekly podcast that offers senior leaders insights and strategies to not only lead with confidence and vision, but also to achieve groundbreaking results. I'm your host, Mike O'Neill. I coach top-level executives on the power of ethical leadership to forge teams to be as united as they are effective. In each episode, join me for insightful conversations with leaders just like you, providing practical advice to help you get unstuck and propel you and your company forward. Let's get started. Have you ever wondered what it takes to successfully build, sell, and start over, this time with even bigger ambitions? In this episode, I sit down with John Ghiorso, an entrepreneur who founded one of the world's leading Amazon agencies, sold it, and is now launching not one, but 5 new marketing agencies in rapid succession. John's story isn't just about business growth. It's about vision, resilience, and the power of leveraging lessons learned. We explore how he's applying his operational frameworks to scale faster and why he's building this next chapter in public. His approach resonates deeply with the leaders I coach, who often face the challenge of taking bold, decisive steps to reach the next level. If you're ready to rethink how you approach growth and leadership, this conversation will leave you inspired and armed with fresh insights. I'm Mike O'Neill, and this is the Get Unstuck and On Target podcast. Let's dive in. Joining me is John Ghiorso. In 2008, John founded Orca Pacific, a full-service Amazon agency. Over the following decade, he built into one of the world's leading Amazon and e-commerce agencies. In 2020, he made the decision to sell Orca to Media Monks. He stayed on for 3 years to complete the earnout, and he further expanded the business into the enterprise market. In 2023, he decided to retire, but quickly realized retirement wasn't for him. John is now in the process of building a new company, a venture studio that aims to launch 5 marketing agencies over the next 2 years. While the studio at this recording has yet to be named, it already has 1 agency up and running with a second one close behind. Unlike the last time, John will be building in public, openly sharing lessons he's learned from growing his first company and how he's applying those insights to his next venture. Welcome, John.
Thanks, Mike. Thanks for having me on.
John, we were talking before we hit the record button about which platforms do we typically use. You mentioned LinkedIn. That is my preferred platform as well. What you didn't mention is you have nearly 22,000 followers on LinkedIn. And what caught my attention, and that's how you and I first connected, we share 25 mutual connections. I had to have you on a podcast, did I not?
I like it. It took me a while to get up to that number, but yeah, it's served me well in my career.
You have chosen the entrepreneurial route, and the things that you have done really intrigue me. I love bringing entrepreneurs onto the podcast, but I particularly like to bring those folks who have started and have run business from a successful standpoint. You have done so, sold it, and you started all over again. And I'm a little bit intrigued. For those who are not familiar with kind of the niche that you're working, these agencies, can you kind of explain what is it you're intended to do over the next couple of years or so?
Yeah. So, I mean, my entire professional career has been agency entrepreneurship, right? Starting and running marketing service companies. The first one I did was Amazon focused. We were kind of like there were contemporaries, but one of the original Amazon full service agencies. Grew that up to around 100 people. It was a solid business and sold it. And kind of long story short, but when I retired or attempted to retire, I realized I actually did really kind of miss running a business, and specifically I missed running agencies. it's an interesting type of business. It's not for everybody. There are, like all businesses, there are, great things about it, and there's really challenging, difficult things about it. Um, but it's what I know, it's what I love, it's what I've done for 15 years. And while candidly, I was a little burned out on e-commerce as a domain, I was not burned out on the agency concept as a business model. And I, in some ways, feel like I'm just kind of getting started, and there's so much more even, for me to learn still. So I was excited about it. I I didn't want to just do the same thing I'd already done over again. Um, so I decided to take a different spin on it this time, which is to basically force multiply my experience and expertise and, frankly, capital at this point, to attempt to start multiple agencies in pretty rapid succession. So instead of like starting one and, running it over 10 years like I did before, the goal is to start five and rapidly grow them over, 3, 4, 5 years. So kind of push the boundaries a little bit of what's possible inside of this business model.
So when you do that force multiplier, this is something that you've learned a lot by doing it yourself, but you did it on a much slower time frame.
Correct.
What are the things that, for those who don't know what we're talking about, can you just explain an agency, as we're talking about digital agency, what are the kind of services a digital agency provides?
Yeah. So, I mean, there, last I checked, it depends on what study you look at, but there's somewhere between 40 and 100,000 agencies in the US alone, like marks. Yeah, it's wild. Now, a lot of those are probably one person, right? That's sitting there in agency, but still. But traditionally, it's outsourced marketing services. So it's a business that functionally specializes in a specific domain. Some big ones are paid media, SEO, creative. Like those are some of the big categories out there. But you can get into really, really niche services, right? Like there's services that book people on podcasts. There's services that just make banner ads for one specific type of advertising, and that's all they do, and they're kind of the best in the world at it. Um, but basically, the business model is outsource specialized marketing services. And the new domain broadly that I've chosen to kind of launch all of these various agencies in is in the world of B2B. So B2B is obviously a pretty big category in and of itself, but all of the agencies I'm launching will be focused on kind of niche, productized services. So, repeatable, value additive, ongoing services that sit inside of this, overall kind of B2B ICP.
As a person who's investing this way, you have a choice. You're choosing to do it this way. What is it about this rapid expansion that appeals to you personally?
So agencies are usually not very good businesses, and what I mean by that is that they don't grow very fast. They're low margin. They're kind of like high stress. They're not very profitable. Like as a category, they're kind of like restaurants. Like on average, a restaurant is not a good business to be in. That being said, there are restaurant, serial entrepreneurs that have been incredibly successful and has kind of systemized how to do this, right? So I'm just very interested, one, in that concept, in terms of kind of pushing the bounds of what's possible. Two, I've been a bootstrap guy. Like I've never raised money. I'm probably not going to raise money for this venture, and I kind of like that because I like being in control. I like just being able to make all the decisions, being ultimately in control. While I haven't necessarily experienced the opposite of that, or the alternative, I should say, it's not really something that appeals to me. So agencies you can bootstrap because, unlike some other companies, there's not a big capital requirement, right? There's services, you can get them to profitability quite quickly. You don't have to go pay millions of dollars for equipment or to develop code, or you can just kind of start doing the service. You can just launch it very quickly. Most agencies are also they're not very well systematized, and for me, I think that's the big unlock. Like the big unlock here is not just like throwing stuff against a wall and seeing what sticks, but taking a very deliberate operational framework, in kind of multiple aspects of the business. So basically taking a road tested operating framework and then changing out the team, because obviously every team is unique, and changing out the domain, because obviously there are kind of new bets on new domains, but then having consistency across the operational framework. And, frankly, I think it's going to be super profitable. Like, that's also obviously part of the goal here, is like make this make sense economically. And I think there can be a lot of value created in a pretty short amount of time, where I'm not giving up big chunks of the company to investors.
This operational framework you described, would that mean each of these entities as it comes online would be pretty much independent from the others?
They will be, but they'll share the same DNA.
Hmm.
So, functionally, I don't even know what my title is yet, but I'm going to be kind of functionally like a chairman, but also more than a chairman, because I'll be in kind of the in the day to day to some degree with all the businesses. Um, yeah, they're going to share like a lot of so agency entrepreneurs all kind of have to invent this stuff, which is interesting. Like, I know lots of other agency entrepreneurs, some a lot more successful than me. Um, we all invented all this like operating framework over years and years.
Mhm.
We all kind of ended up in the same place. Find that very interesting. Like, we all invented the wheel, but we all thought we were the first person to invent the wheel. And then we looked around and we're like, oh, there's a lot of other wheels. And most agency entrepreneurs, though, don't start multiple agencies. Most of them just do it one time, for a bunch of reasons. So that knowledge gets sort of like lost.
Yeah.
And just the new agency entrepreneur has to kind of like reinvent the same stuff. And it just creates a lot of inefficiency and kind of slowness. And yeah, basically, I think I can like, you know, stand on my own kind of experience and just get to a place where these things are, efficiently running, they're growing quickly, much faster than frankly the competitors. So
I don't know if you can or would want to answer this question, but what I'm envisioning is you've kind of put yourself on a horizon, launch these for the next 2 years, have a run out 3 to 5 years. But if you have this operational framework and it's fine tuned as you go, it would seem to me that it could just be what you do on an indefinite basis. You just keep growing in that particular niche. But if what you're describing works there, it would work in almost any industry, would it not?
I think it would work in any service business. Well, I shouldn't say any service business. I don't know if I could start like an accounting firm and do
Mm.
this, right? But I think it would work in any agency. And again, there's 100,000 of these things, pretty broad world. Yes. So I'll answer your question this way. If this works, and I've kind of called my shot, right? It kind of puts some pressure on me. I like that. Like, oh, I have to go do this now. So if this works, if all or the majority of these agencies are successful, and I have a co-founder, by the way, too, doing this with me. But what we will have effectively created is a business that launches businesses. Um, and while each one of these agencies is important and we want them to be successful, and we're going to do everything we can to make sure they're offering, great value to the clients, et cetera, there is this other business that sits on top of it, which is the venture studio. And that is the thing that becomes really interesting, because we can
Mm.
do it with 5, we can do it with 10 or 20 or 30, or, I mean, the venture studio itself becomes the most compelling part of the entire business, potentially. Um, there's also this interesting sort of meta concept where we're launching companies that the service is to grow B2B companies, right? Like, our
Mhm.
clients will be B2B companies, and our goal ultimately in one way or another is to help them grow. Um, we're also B2B companies.
Right.
So there's this sort of self-referential thing where we can dog food our own services and not only launch, but very quickly scale these agencies using the other agencies' capabilities. So while they will all be standalone businesses, they can and will help one another out. And then that also becomes this really kind of compelling flywheel if we do it right. So
As I'm listening to you, and for those who are watching, you can see your eyes kind of light up in terms of what possibilities might unfold. You've chosen the route you have. You've mentioned there's such upside potential if this worked. And you've also described from a business model standpoint why this has so much going for it. We have, as listeners, entrepreneurs, we have leaders out there. What is it about doing this that just excites you to get you up in the morning?
I spent a lot of time thinking about this, and I had convinced myself that my first company was done for mainly extrinsic reasons, right? And that once I had achieved those goals, I was done. That's why I retired. I was like, okay, mission accomplished, sold a company, I'm good. Um, I'm gonna hang out and read books and kind of live my life, and there's nothing wrong with that stuff. But um, what I realized kind of when that was taken away is that there is intrinsic value here as well.
Mm,
This is a me thing, right? I don't know if this is advice, but for me, um, I do need to be building and accomplishing things.
mm,
I don't know why. It's just the way I'm wired. I'm not entirely sure, but I am much more fulfilled when I'm working on hard problems with people I like and we're kind of jointly accomplishing and creating value. I love creating something that goes beyond me. That, like, yes, I might have started it, hired people, and they're my ideas, and accept, but like the thing then becomes just its own sort of like organism. I don't know why, but that's like incredibly rewarding to me. It's probably something that's been wired into my DNA through 100,000 years of evolution, I suppose. But it's just I get super excited about it, and I like being excited about stuff. Like I like waking up in the morning and you know looking forward to my day. So yeah.
I don't know if I even said this out loud because as you're talking, what popped in my head is I come out of a corporate HR background. I led HR for fast growing companies. I understood corporate life. But for the last 15 years, I've been an entrepreneur. And I have found myself drawn to entrepreneurs like yourself because what I'm finding is successful entrepreneurs are, in fact, hardwired differently. If I had to say what probably is exciting me is how does one infuse entrepreneurial mindsets back into corporate who tend to get set in their ways? I love you. You use the term "I called my shot." That's a sports, reference.
Yeah.
You made a decision, but you also made an interesting decision. You're gonna go. You're gonna do all this publicly. You're gonna be open about that. Is there a risk of it being done in a way that the world's watching?
Yes, there are two big risks, and this was not. Some people take build in public to an extreme, and it's not necessarily a judgment, but that's not what I'm attempting to do. I'm not going to release my financials, right? As an example, like some companies do, they just share their whole P&L.
Mhm.
There's two risks. One is I fail, and that is like it's just a big hit to my ego, right?
Yeah.
That's basically risk one. Risk two is I overshare, and it creates competitive pressure. Like competitors know what we're doing, and they knock us off. And the agency world is one of um, a very few barriers to entry. Right? Anyone can just start an agency. You don't need a degree. You don't need to. You don't need to pass the bar. You just can do it. So those are the two. I mean, the first one is just it is what it is. The second one is frankly like I am thoughtful about that. Like, if someone reads this, could they just like completely copy us? Like, probably not, right? Like, they're not going to read a LinkedIn post and then like be able to reverse engineer our strategy.
Mhm.
But that's the risk. Here's the upside of it. I am a big believer in general in business in just giving away as much as you can for free, and then like not like just sitting back and waiting necessarily, but just generally expecting that the more you do that, the more is going to come back to you. Um, that is not as altruistic as it sounds. That is selfish practical, pragmatic approach if you do it in the right way. But I think it's this balance if you're both, but you can't fake it, right? You have to genuinely be interested in teaching people and helping them succeed and sharing value with them. But then you also do have a profit motive. Um, and I've kind of used that in multiple aspects. I've used that in sales. That's how I approach sales. It's how I approach marketing. It's how I approach, like lots of things I do kind of in the overall realm of business. But I've just found that to be super effective. So this build in public kind of component of that is new, but the underlying philosophy I think is something I've carried for a while.
I think before we hit the record button, we were talking about platforms, and you've chosen LinkedIn as a platform, and you've grown your followers to the size they have. What is it about LinkedIn that has served your purpose and will likely serve your purpose going forward?
Um, I have been a fan of LinkedIn for probably at least 7 years. I've been active on there. Uh, so this is all very related. So the first company, which I did not start in our studio, so it's not really a venture studio, it's more like a portfolio company. But the first business that's part of this broad endeavor was started by my former director of marketing, who worked at my old agency, and he's now my co-founder in this new venture studio. Anyway, that business is a full service LinkedIn agency.
Hmm.
And the seed of the idea for that business is Garrett, my former director of marketing and now business partner at Orca 7 years ago, was like, you need to be on LinkedIn and you need to be talking on LinkedIn. And he was way ahead of the curve on this. And I was reluctant. I was like, no, that's weird. It's cheesy. Like, that's not me. I don't want to. And he's like, just try it. Basically, long story short, did a few posts. It worked. We got like a one lead out of it, And it
Mhm.
was I did a complete 180 because it was like, I'm just here to make the business successful. Whatever I can do, I'll do. And it was like, okay, this works. Let's do more of it. And it worked more and more and more and more. Um, so one, I love it from a just practical business results standpoint. Like if you have something to say, you have a unique idea about your industry, you're in some role where you're trying to create more opportunity for you as an entrepreneur or for your company, or you're in sales. But even if it's almost always a good idea to be creating content on LinkedIn. But two, they're doing great. Like I think they're super well run. They've become, we were talking about this before we hit record, they become probably the only I don't want to use the word safe space because that's a loaded term, but they've become the only social media platform that's just professional and sort of generally pleasant, and there's no downside of being on there. I mean, sure, I guess could you waste some time potentially, but for me, I spend time on LinkedIn and I feel like I get smarter every time I'm on there, just listening to experts talk about different things, connect with tons of people. And yeah, I think they've done a fantastic job. And I still think there's a lot of kind of upside potential for that company. And I'm just a big, big fan of what they're doing.
I appreciate your insights. John, as you kind of think about your entrepreneurial journey so far, can you share an example where perhaps you or a client got stuck? And when that happened, what did it take to get unstuck?
So I got stuck with my agency about halfway through my sort of journey. So I think this was 2015.
Hmm.
Our growth had started to slow down a bit. And this could be a 30-minute kind of explanation, but the headline here is that all agencies have some degree of churn, and your churn is relative to revenue, right? So the more revenue you have, the more net churn you have. But growth is typically, it's not relative to revenue. So if you're adding $1 million a year in new business, that's great, but at some point it'll equalize.
Yeah.
And that was starting to happen. And it wasn't because growth wasn't going well. It's just we hadn't scaled growth in proportion to the size of the business. So I would say that was stuck. That was maybe pretty literally a sort of stuck, or I was getting close to being stuck. I could see the math and where the trend line was going, and it was oh, this just stops. The growth stops. So that's when I decided to go from a one-person me growth team to building out, I think a 10-person team over about a year. fully kind of built a full stack growth team, systematized it, started to really understand all the attribution and the math that went into it and make sure it was capital efficient. We were a bootstrap company, so we had to the investment had to pay for itself pretty quickly. And honestly, that's, I would say, when I became really educated in a lot of the stuff that I'm doing now. Before then, I was like an e-commerce guy and I was an e-commerce expert, but I wasn't necessarily like a grow a business expert.
Mm.
And that was like a forcing function to go, we have to figure this out. And I hired some really great people around me, and we did, and the company actually started growing faster than it ever had. And a couple of years later, we were able to sell it.
Mm. John, as you reflect on your journey so far, if you had to kind of pick one piece of advice that you would share, be it for leaders who are trying to grow their business or maybe even like you, considering starting over, what would that be?
I think people need to spend a lot more of their time consuming high quality information. So I would say reading,
Mm.
but you don't have to literally read books. I mean, they can be podcasts, can be articles, blogs, whatever. I think, honestly, 20% of your sort of economically productive time, not golfing or spending time with your kids or whatever, should be spent on consuming information, not just doing work.
Mm.
And I would say that for W-2 employees trying to, do better in their career, for entrepreneurs, it is the single, probably the single most important capability that we have as a species is to learn from others who have
Mm.
already done a thing, synthesize that information, and then make better decisions going forward because of that information. And I just think most people get the ratio wrong. People read books, I get it, but I think if people consume massive quantities of information over a couple of years, they will be shocked at how much they will accelerate in their career.
And I make sure I understand correctly. One of the things I hear you say is that you want to learn from a variety of sources,
Yep.
but learning in it itself is not what you're saying. But in learning is how do you apply that learning in a way that might open up thoughts, be it whatever, that you might not have thought before. How do you take this yearning to learn and make sure that you're benefiting from that? What is it you are asking yourself while you're doing this to make sure that it doesn't just get tucked away somewhere and forgotten?
So I try to focus on topics that are sometimes very directly related to what I'm doing, but
Mm.
not always. Sometimes sort of second order, like tangentially related.
Mm.
Um, so uh, maybe obvious example, but I've read, this is actually a couple of years ago before the AI craze. I maybe read like 5 books on AI, right? I'm not a technical guy. I'm not reading like technical books on machine learning, but just, kind of popular nonfiction books on kind of where is this going? What's the bull case? What's the bear case? There's a book by Henry Kissinger. There was there's like various kind of experts with views on politics, culture, and society, and the actual the tech industry, and on the military industry, and kind of like how this is going to impact things. I now that AI is becoming sort of a very important today thing for anyone running an agency, I have this depth of knowledge that most people wouldn't naturally have. I certainly didn't naturally have. I didn't learn this in school. And I think I make better decisions around the practical application of AI in my day-to-day business because 3 years ago, I read these 5 books. I didn't necessarily plan on launching an agency that would have AI capabilities. But I think just being broadly educated
Mhm.
in things that could sort of come up, your brain is this incredible machine that will start making all these connections. You don't necessarily have to kind of pre-plan for those connections to be made, right? By just consuming more information, your brain's like this supercomputer, but it's only as good as the inputs.
Hmm.
More inputs you put into it, the better outputs, i.e. decisions you will make. And honestly, other than the actual effort, like showing up and doing the work, most of success is dependent on decision making. It's just who makes better decisions. Or those are the people that win. Everyone kind of works the same amount. Like, Jeff Bezos probably doesn't work a whole lot more hours than I work. Yet he's, thousands of times more successful than me. Why? Because he's made better decisions. I think that's the X factor. So if you can allow yourself to make better decisions, you will level up much faster.
Great answer. John, before we wrap up, I've got a question for the leaders in the audience, and that is, why do people choose to follow your lead? Is it out of obligation, or do they truly believe in your vision? As an executive coach, I help leaders develop clarity and confidence and resilience to navigate those challenges and inspire their teams. At Bench Builders, we focus on transforming good leaders into great ones with practical strategies that drive real results. So I challenge you, lead with purpose and inspire belief in your vision. Visit bench-builders.com to learn how we can support your leadership journey. John, thank you so much for your valuable insight today. If folks want to reach out to you to connect and learn more, what's the best way for them to do that?
Yeah, thanks, Mike. Best way is on LinkedIn. Just search my name. I'm sure we'll link to it in the show notes. That's kind of where I hang out most of the time. The first company is called Influent Social in the portfolio. Second company is yet to be named. But it'll be an outbound messaging service that should launch in Q1, and then I'll obviously be talking about them on the internet as we launch number 3 through 5. So
I'm looking forward to tracking your continued success, John. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Mike. Appreciate it.
I also want to give a big thank out to the subscribers to this podcast, and I hope that today's discussion provided you some insights to help you get unstuck and on target. Thank you for joining us for this episode of Get Unstuck and On Target. I hope you've gained insights to help you lead with confidence and drive your organization forward. Remember, at Bench Builders, we're committed to your success, your leadership excellence, and your strategic growth. If you've enjoyed our conversation today, please leave a review, rate, and subscribe to keep up with our latest episodes. This show really grows when listeners like you share it with others. Who do you know who needs to hear what we talked about today? Until next time, I encourage you to stay focused on the target and continue to break new ground on your leadership path.